starting. All right, welcome back to On the Throne with Dick. How's it going, man?
I'm doing well, and I couldn't be happier to be a part of this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, dude, of course, man. Fuck, this is Gord. Special guest with us this week is Gord from the Second Act podcast, and I was on his podcast. What was it? 8 months ago.
Something like that. Yeah.
Man, I love your podcast. I love it, and I love what you do with your son at the beginning, right? Like it's amazing, and I kind of want to start getting my oldest daughter into that. She's my wife makes little lunch videos of what she's packing for her for lunch in the mornings,
Yeah.
for school. And she's kind of got her saying, "This is my kindergartner's lunch for today," yada, 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 right? So,
Yeah.
like, what you do with your son on your podcast is kind of what I hope to get my daughter into, even just a little introduction. Hey, welcome back to another episode of On the Throne, right? And I don't know if you noticed, there's 5 people watching. This is my first ever live episode, and yeah.
There's 5 people out here watching us. That's great, and I always think of that when I look at my numbers on my podcast, and I think, however many people are listening to it that week, and I think that's not a very big number. But if that many people were sitting in front of me, I would think, holy cow, look at all these people that care enough about what I'm talking about to stop for a second. So thank you very much for the 5 people that are here.
Yeah, no, it blows my mind because it's 5 people, which not a lot. There's more people in this camp, but 5 people, like you said, are interested in what we're saying enough to come on in. And the power of social media. Social media is crazy, right? And as we've talked about when I was on your podcast 8 months ago, it was just what a ride it's been, right?
Yeah, well, you were in the episodes, you were in the 40s, 45, 46, and this week's episode is number 87. I really never missed a week since I decided to do a podcast. I took about a month off last month when I was at the lake, and I needed a break. But it's a lot of fun, and as you were saying, my son, he'll be 15 here in about a week. He's been sitting in, and he listens to them, and we do a little back and forth for a few minutes before each episode. And it's really neat to sit down with him and get his take on some of the things that we're talking about in there. The Second Act podcast is about people that are doing something a little bit different than what they started out at, or in your case, just, doing something different, something fun, something other people think, man, I would love to do that. What does that look like? Right. A life of creation, as I like to call it.
Yeah, and yeah, man, like you said, when I was on there, it's doing something different, but I'm doing the same thing that I've always done, just adding to my plate, right? And it turns out when you have all this time in camp, everyone's like, "Oh, I'm so busy, don't have time for that." I don't drink, and I don't do other things, and I don't really hang out with the crew. Sometimes I do, right? So like, oh, my boss, where do you get time for this? It's like, there's tons of time. I don't go to the gym. Sometimes I don't have time, so I don't do it. Sometimes it's bed before anything else, but yeah, there's always time to do what you want to do, right? Some guys go to the gym, some guys go have a couple drinks. I do podcasts and TikTok, talk to my kids and my wife.
Yeah, and I think if you have that little creative itch to you, which I have, that's a great way. Like I've done a couple of things with the podcast where I've kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but stretched my creative wings a little bit. Not obviously not to the level that you do yet. Maybe one day I'll get there, but it's just a lot of fun when you're commuting, or you're doing something where you have some time, and you're like, man, I watched that clip, and that I could, if I changed that, and if I could manage to, and then you write a little script out in your head, and then you actually write it down, and you throw it by somebody whose opinion you trust, and the next thing you know, they snickered or laughed, and you're like, okay, I think I got this, right? It's a lot of fun to see it come to life.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know if you can see the comments. There's comments that you slide over the little comments tab. I don't know if you can see it. There's 7 comments, right? Hey, Byron Miller, love that guy. Chris K, that woman. Hey, um, Lunar Communications, Lunar Comms. She's created my website, so big shout out to her. She's amazing. Has a candy store that's opening in Tofield, Alberta here soon. Doing huge things. Kylie, how's it going? I see the
Wow.
chat now, Chris.
Yeah. I was full screen before, but now I've got it down and I can see what's going on here. It's incredible to see this many people sitting in live.
Ruin it for me. So interrupted. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Someone just called and interrupted. Dennis. Okay, I gotta turn this to do not disturb mode. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you are. You bet.
Oh, my AirPods cut out. Jeez. Oh well, whatever. Yeah. This is the stuff that people don't see when we're not live. This is the live stream. This is the shit that gets annoying is when people call in, and when you're listening back to the podcast, you don't see the shit behind the scenes that's going on and what you got to do because it's all on my phone, right? So
Well, and that's part of like when people ask about the podcast, it's like how much time do you spend on it? And when I tell them to get a 45-minute, reasonable podcast, it's probably 8 to 10 hours, depending on how, I've had some, reasonably high profile guests on where you have to read up on things because they're going to talk about things and you want to have your dates and time straight. And it can be the next thing you know, you're 12, 14 hours into a podcast and it's 42 minutes for somebody to blow through on a Monday morning, right?
you do a lot of editing then, because like for me, if I do like a 2-hour podcast, takes me so how we were backstage before I hit live and we talked there for a little bit, and sometimes I could go for a bit, right? And then after it's done, some people just leave, but then there's times where we just finish it and we have a little chat afterwards and backstage or whatever you want to call it. And so if it's 2 hours, that could easily turn into 3, right?
Yeah.
And because shooting the shit at the front and at the back side of it, but I don't really do any editing that much unless something is said that somebody really wants taken out. It's like, cool, we'll take that out. But for the most part, I don't do any editing, right? I want the natural conversation. I want it all to be heard, right? It's organic and it happened. If you don't want it, cool, we'll take it out. But for the most part, it's going up.
Yeah, I do some editing, especially if there's like if I notice that somebody's saying a lot, I'll kind of keep track, and then if it gets to be just too much, I'll go in and I'll sit there and listen to it again, and I'll just cut the ums out of it or whatever, or enough of it that it doesn't sound so too bad. I actually just recorded with a fella he's from Indiana. He's a homesteader in Indiana, and at the end of the podcast, I said, man, you're super well spoken. Like the way you articulate what you're trying to say is incredible. And I said, and you never said the whole time. I was like, I always keep track of that in case I have to go back. And he was like, I appreciate you saying that to me, because he said I stuttered like mad and I could not speak publicly until I started on TikTok. And he said, and once I started, getting a little more comfortable in front of the camera, it came naturally. This is how I think. I could never articulate it. And now I'm learning how to articulate it. And I was like, well, dude, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. 'Cause you're an incredible orator. Like it was just an incredible interview. It'll be coming up here in a couple of weeks. Justin, I should know this. This is a name I should know. A Jackson fella. He's real good. Keep your eyes out for it.
So do you have a clicker, or did you see the clicker on Amazon? You can get a clicker. You're recording a podcast. You can listen in, and when you're listening to it back, every time you hear like an or an or something, or you say, if you say something where you messed up, you click, and then when you're listening to it back, you hear the click, and then you say it again, and then you end click, and then you can go back in, and then from it shows where you clicked to where you unclicked. You can go in and hover above it, delete, and you know, it's easy. It's a lot easier. Someone send it to me, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
But I am not well spoken. I say a lot of things. I have a lot of brain farts, and that has a lot to do, I think, with ADHD. That just it's never been diagnosed or anything like that, but like it's definitely there. And I had Dennis here, Dennis Devereaux. I don't know if you can see in the comments there. He was actually on episode 2, and I don't know. Did you listen to episode 2, Gord?
No, I never listened to episode 2.
Okay, so episode 2, him and I started talking about one thing. We sidetracked off of a sub conversation that happened, you know, in there somewhere. We went this way for like 25 minutes, and then I'm like, so, anyways, back to this, and we kept going straight. And I do that a lot. I think it's funny, and I just play with it. I love it.
Well, I apologize, Dennis. I did listen to episodes 1, 3, and 4, and I just skipped the one. Of course, the person who I skipped is actually attending the live, and I got egg on my face.
So Dennis is a stud. I don't know if you ever want to talk to a guy who's in his second act. That guy right there, right? Like he is an engineer from, I don't know, he's from Ontario or Newfoundland, but he lived in Ontario, and you know, he was an engineer for Chrysler, I believe it was, and he's just had enough and came out to the oil field, and now he's in the oil patch and doing his thing here, right? So, you know, he he's definitely, I call him a good friend. I definitely had him on that episode. I'm gonna have him on many more. I love the energy he brings a lot of the time, the comedy he brings to some stuff. So I'm definitely, we've talked about it. He's definitely gonna be a co-host of mine, a special guest co-host or whatever. Once in a while, yeah, we have a lot of ADHD or ADD combos for sure.
That's great. Well, Dennis, I'll get your contact info from Dick here, and we'll have to, you know, see if there's a fit for maybe what we're trying to do over at the Second Act podcast, talking to people who are doing something a little different than what they started out at. That's for sure. I feel like a salesman, Dick, when I say that. It's wild. I was like, man, you got to make sure you tell all of Dick's fans what the Second Act podcast is all about, so that people might get curious. But it's funny to when I get in here, I get really self-conscious because I feel like I'm at your house, right? And I wouldn't just start telling your family and friends about me, but that's what these kind of things are about. It's discovery, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to tell Dennis the kind of guests that you've had on your podcast, because let me tell you, the guest list is amazing, and I will tell you one of my all-time favorites that you've had on there, but you just tell him the kind of people you've had on first. And if you hit the money shot on there, Dennis is gonna be erect fully. Like, no.
That's great. I appreciate that visual as I head into so I've had an incredible amount of guests.
Yeah.
You know, some people with names you're going to recognize. I've had Kelly Rudy, Scott Oak, Natasha Stanishevsky, Rick the Temp, Rick Campanelli, former Saskatchewan Premier, Brad Wall, and it's been quite a ride. But I'll tell you, the guests that I want to tell you about are people like Olivia Hartley, a girl from the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, who was a sex worker or a sex therapist type worker, and she became a sex worker, a high end call girl. Jesse Crisson, he's a guy from Virginia in the United States who spent 19 years of 32 in prison of his 32-year prison sentence, and then he was paroled with no notice, and he was trying to reintegrate himself into the world. And it's just, you know, the guests like that are the ones that I just, they're so much fun to bring to people. For every Dr. Jody Carrington that people want to, you know, they know, and they go and hear the story that they've heard already, I have 5 of these people that you've never heard of, that you may walk by, or you never know where they live. And those are the guests that I love to bring.
So you hit the money spot with Dennis, see? Rick Campanelli. From the GTA, Rick Campanelli, big deal, or was a big deal, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm 87 episodes deep, and I'm coming up to episode 100. And the 2 names that I've put out into the world that I'd like to have for episode 100 are George Stroumboulopoulos, because of what he's done. But my ultimate bucket list guest for episode 100 would be Haley Wickenheiser, because she's done I mean, on her own, she's one of the greatest hockey players, regardless of gender, ever. But then, oh, by the way, she's also the assistant general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and she's an emergency room attending physician, and all these other things. And it's like to not just rest on those laurels and keep doing things, man. I'd love to understand an hour with her to understand what makes her tick. I think that would just be the coolest thing.
Yeah. Oh man, that'd be crazy. So, you don't have the second act on TikTok, do you?
I started one, so I did an engagement thing in January, and I was doing it where I was creating it on TikTok and then just using it on an Instagram, and my Instagram suffered. My podcast isn't huge, right? Like I'm nowhere near your numbers, and so then I started creating it on Instagram and creating two of the same and using the hashtags that are specific to Instagram and specific to TikTok. And lo and behold, I got a bunch of traction. My engagement for the month of January was like 1,000% greater than it was for December.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of like, oh, son of a gun. It works. Now I got to keep doing this. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I've been I've been pushing the TikToks a little bit more recently, trying to come up with creative new things to do on TikTok.
So what the reason why those numbers are what they are, right? And you're starting to do it is like I put an insane amount of like I guess press work into it or tour or media work into it, right? Like I tour the shit out of it, right? I started the On the Throne podcast TikTok page, and what I'm doing, I go to random lives, right? I just go through I scroll the lives and I listen to people talk and I'm like, hey, what's going on? I start conversations with them. They start conversations with me. We follow each other. I put out, teaser trailers. Something with the last podcast we talked about doing, and I think we started doing, but like this one here, like I did Dennis's a great disservice, and I'm sorry about that. I wasn't fully prepared with how I wanted to go about it at the time, and then when episode 3 hit, I'm like, hey, teaser trailers. I'm not gonna keep it a secret until the day of anymore. I'm gonna pump this up for a week, right? And not even a week, 4 days, right? Because by the time I'm done pumping up episode 3, we're 3 days away from episode 4. So I'm like, okay. So I give it a break for a day, go on Saturday. I'm like, okay, let's start pumping up the next episode then. I put out a couple of them. And then, I started making videos of myself on there, with just the trends and stuff. And then when it comes to Facebook, I joined every podcast group I could think of on Facebook. And it's like, hey, share your link here, share your link here. Hey, what's your show? Where is it about? Yada, yada, yada. So I just pump it out there, right? And, like, I'm finding the same issue. It's not really an issue. I'm really pumped, and it's a goal of mine. I want to get the podcast listened to in South America because I couldn't do it last time, and so far I can't. But someone in Wichita, Kansas, wherever you are, whoever you are in Wichita, Kansas, big shout out. I don't know who you are, but I love you. You're a big, bright red spot on the map, and I love that. But we're in the Ukraine right now, Africa, the Middle East, lots in Europe.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy. And so, then I shared on my Instagrams and Twitter, and I put it on LinkedIn, and I just shared everywhere, right? And it's you gotta do it, right? And then one guy was like, "I'll follow for follow." I'm like, okay, here's what I'll do. I'm like, I'll like your show, but I want to listen to it first. Here's mine. And I don't want just a follow for follow. I want you to can you listen to it? Listen to it. I don't want you to like it just because you want me to like yours. Right? I want you to like it because you like it. Right? And he's like, yeah, sure, why not? And I listened to his. I listened to half of it. I fell asleep because I was traveling, and it was just like that's what I do when I travel. I sleep. I put a podcast on, fall asleep, and from what I heard of it, I liked it. So I followed, and so I got a follower to him too, so which is pretty good. And he gave me some feedback. He said he enjoyed it. He listened to the one with Chris Barber. He listened to the one with Dennis, and hey, Tracy Mack's in the house. Yeah. Oh, Chris, that would suck. She said, she's like, I changed my IP location. It's me everywhere. Well, shout out to you. Well, Dennis says I have an amazing idea that will get international attention. All right, let's do it. Let's
Does
hear
it
it.
involve kidnapping an embassy's daughter or something like that?
So I'm trying to get right now. You were talking Kelly Rudy and Scott Oak. I'm um, trying to get Theo Fleury on. Right.
Oh yeah.
I think that would be an amazing podcast. And I already talked to someone that knows Theo Fleury, who was already on my show last week, Chris Barber. He is friends with Theo Fleury. So I'm like, hey man, do you think you can hook me up and get in his ear a little bit? Tell him somebody he wants you on his podcast. And he's like, man, I can do that. I hung out with him today, so I don't know how that went. I don't want to push too hard. I'm gonna sound like I'm being crazy about it. So
That's the only time I've ever done that was when I had Kelly on, and he was super great. That's one thing I like to talk about when I have somebody with a profile on is I've had some people and they've all been just so good, man. And Kelly was the best. And I said, I would like to have Scott Oak on. He's one of the guys that I've just been, and he's not active on social media, and he's just impossible to get a hold of. Um, you know, is there anything you could do? And Kelly's like, he's so a matter of fact. Well, I'm flying to Toronto to be on Hockey Night in Canada this weekend, so I'll be throwing it over to him at some point. And sure
that's
enough,
amazing.
like 4 days later, I get a text message and the contact card says Scott Oak. And I'm just like, is this real life? Give me a break.
Dennis is a great idea. Is that Kylie's friend, Dennis? The lady who made that video of moms need to do more than just be a mom, right? Like she was wearing her bikini at the beach and she had her kid and she's like, hey, you know what? I'm a mom, but I'm also a person too, and I want to look good and feel good sometimes. And she went super viral. She's being interviewed in like the New York Times and over in Europe and stuff about it. And she's getting a lot of hate for it, but yeah, no, that's a great idea, Dennis. I'd love to do that. You just let me know. And Boyd Devereaux, dude, I don't care if Boyd Devereaux's a douche. He's still former Toronto Maple Leaf. That'd be cool.
Yeah, well, that's part of the risky run, right? They tell you to never meet your heroes, and you never know if somebody's going to be tough to manage, tough to deal with. You got to kind of just hope for the best when you reach out to people. I've been pretty fortunate. I had Earl Pereira from Widemouth Mason, and he was like the best. Tara Sloan was a couple weeks ago from Hometown Hockey, and what I remember her from is the band Joy dropped the video with Tommy Lee, and she, she was the best. Like, she just couldn't have been a better guest. She was professional, she was on time, her audio was great, and she was just cool, right? Which is like the best of both worlds.
So before we get too far in here, where can we find your podcast?
I'm on all the podcast carriers. The bulk of my traffic comes from Apple and Spotify, but I'm on Good Pods, Google Podcasts. I don't know. It's called The Second Act Podcast. As I was saying, we're about 87 episodes deep. Dick alluded, my 15-year-old son and I record an intro, and then we try to find people that are on the second act of their life, their career. It's a funny story about how I started it. Through my work, I became friends with an ex-NHLer, Stanley Cup champion here in Calgary, and I'll say his name because he's been on the podcast, Robin Regier. And but once you met Reg, and then you met his business partner was actually a more interesting guy. Robin just happened to have a Stanley Cup ring and Joe Sakic's phone number in his phone, right?
Wow.
And once you got past that, his business partner was like, he's owned a bunch of businesses. He was like a high angle rescue specialist for the Calgary Fire Department. He acted in all those, Westerns that they shot down around Longview and stuff. He was an extra in all them. And I was just like, and I'd known him for a year or more when I found all this stuff out about him. And I just thought, how many people are like that, right? And then you start asking around, and a lot of people are like that. So I wanted to just highlight stories of people. I was in the spot, man. I was working at a place I wasn't super thrilled to be, but I was kind of like, a lot of people would have thought it was a great job, and it was a good job, but just it had run its course with me. And kind of the spot I was at in my life, I went back. It was through COVID, and I was fired / laid off, and I went to Mount Royal. I took some adult education courses to understand how adults process things and information. And I started a podcast talking to people, trying to figure out how to engage people and talk to people, and in an hour, in a compressed time frame, have a meaningful conversation. And that was like a skill development thing that I wanted for myself. And in the meantime, if I got to have an excuse to reach out to whoever, pick somebody that's George Stroumboulopoulos or Haley Wickenheiser, so much the better. So yeah, so that's what we've been doing over there. And we try to, we're active on Instagram and now TikTok. We're trying to engage people and see who people want to hear. It's March, is Women's History Month, so I'm got a bunch of cool ladies lined up to talk to people that are. I got a lady from Atlanta, Georgia, who is she's on TikTok as Millennial Miss Frizzle. She's a PhD candidate in education, and she quit to work at Costco because of the condition of the American education system.
Wow.
I got another lady who's a death doula. She helps people, be comfortable in those last times of her life. And that's like a crazy, that's a career. And, how did you decide that was what you wanted to do? We have these conversations with people, right?
So I've been asking a lot of people that like I don't know their story, but I know like just from what I see, and I want to like dive in a lot more and find out. And the things that come out are actually pretty cool. And so I had a friend on Facebook today. He commented on another post that my other friend had commented on that I also had liked, and he's like, "Jesus, do you guys know everybody and everywhere?" And it's like, well, that's kind of my thing, like what would you call that? I'm not a social media guy. I guess I kind of am, but like I'm a networker. I like to run into random people, talk, find out what they do, get to know them, right? I do that out on site, right? That's where that comes from. I was walking through the halls when I was at Husky Sunrise 10 years ago, whatever it was. I was walking through the halls. I couldn't sleep. It was 9 o'clock at night, whatever, 9:30. And this guy, he's like, "Hey, my phone is dead, and I need to call my son and wish him a happy birthday. And this machine is not spitting out a phone card. Can I use your phone?" Absolutely, man. Call your son. Here you go. After he got off the phone, we got to talking a little bit. He was the operations manager for Husky Canada. And I have him saved in my phone. And once in a while, I still text him a little bit once in a while. And there's another guest I haven't even thought about yet, right? So we still text once in a while. What's his name here? I can't look because my phone is on, but his name's Tony, I believe, or something like that. And like it starts with a T, anyways. But so, anyways, we talk once in a while, and he asks me how life's going, and I haven't talked to him in a few months probably, but like that'd be kind of cool to update him on where it's going, like where things have gone for me in my, I guess, career, from, if you want to call it that, from where I was back then to where I am now. And I know Husky is no longer a thing. I think they got bought out by like CNRL or something. So
yeah, Synovus,
yeah, Synovus. Yeah, they got bought out by Synovus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love talking to people. Like, you know what I mean? Like, anybody. It's cool. Look at Chris here. Chris came in my live. She came into my live one day on TikTok. Had no idea what she did, but she started talking to me, getting to know me. Through getting to know her and talking to her, she designs websites. I just happened to be looking for a website.
Yeah.
Right? Boom, Chris is here. Now she's starting her own candy store in Tofield, the Sour Moose. And here we go. Now I know someone that owns and runs a candy store. That's so.
It's a small world, and that's funny because my maternal grandfather, my mom grew up in Nelson, BC. I'm from a little town in Saskatchewan, in the northeast corner of Saskatchewan. But my grandfather would come out to visit us, and he was a mailman for his career. So he walked and talked. That's what he did. So when he retired, he would drive, and he would pull over for coffee because he was never in a hurry. It was a 2-day drive to get out there. And he just would talk to people, and he would always, "Oh, well, you must know so-and-so." And they would have somebody who was 2 degrees of separation at the most from John McDermott. And my son, the same thing is I'm kind of like that. And it floors my son. We were fishing in northern Saskatchewan 2 years ago or last summer, I guess, and I'd had some tooth troubles, and I just couldn't get into the dentist before we went away. So I was jacked on ibuprofen for our vacation, and I'd lost my ibuprofen. So we stopped in at Little Bear Lake, Saskatchewan, at the resort, and um, the lady that we were buying ibuprofen from, she asked where we were from, and I told her Carrot River, Saskatchewan, and she said, "Oh yeah, well I worked at such and such an auction mart there," and we got talking, and turns out she'd done the auction sale just down the road from my dad's farm, and she knew about where we, you know what I mean? And we got to the truck, and Liam was like, is that real life? Like, did that just happen? Did you seriously just have like a 8-minute conversation with a woman you're trying to buy painkillers from just because you happened to tell her? And I was like, but bro, that's how it goes. When somebody says good and you say, and you, and then you follow up that question, you'll never know where that follow-up question leads. And that follow-up question, that's the difference between good and good and you, right?
Yep, absolutely. And thinking back on it now, this is how I got this job that I currently have now on the vac truck. Right, I was on site. It was in Canna site. I was a frac pad, and I was working for Frac Shack. Hated my job. Didn't want to be there, but I was looking, right? And walking around site, getting to know people, what they did, what how much they made, and what they needed to be there, like education wise and certs wise and whatnot. And then I ran into a guy named Wayne, and he works here still. And we started talking, started having the conversation, and he's like, "Well, we're always looking for guys." And I'm like, perfect, because I hate this job, right? So that was in July. I wanted to, give my 2-week notice, but so it was really weird how that happened. I think they got wind or whatever. So I didn't end up starting here till November, right? So they sat me for a while, but I remained incredibly loyal. I wanted to give my 2-week notice. I worked a week, and then they sat me for a while, and then I went away. I think I went away somewhere. I'm not sure. And then I moved. So then, um, so then I worked that week. I left, and then I came here, and I've been here for 4 years now, right? And do I love it? I mean, it has its moments. It definitely sucks at times, huh? But whatever. It's been an interesting time, and Wayne still works here. One of my favorite people to work with. Almost every single time I've been hurt or almost died, it's because of him. So we're golden. I love the guy.
Yeah, it's those little connections that you make that make all the difference and make a job that maybe isn't awesome all the time bearable, right? Because you have that connection with the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And now my work son works here. Kids getting into the business and or the industry at such a young age. Well, they're not young age, they're 18, 19, right? And but I'm getting older, right? I'm no longer the new guy or the youngest guy in the crew. It's like, shit, man. This kind of sucks. My back hurts, my knees ache, my jeans are too tight, but they're not. Like, what the hell's going on here? Right? And in walks this guy full of piss and vinegar, and we're shooting the shit all the time, and I'm like, fuck, for a Gen Z, you're kind of cool, right? And then his mom's only a couple years older than me. Bonus, right? That's a joke. That's a joke, everybody. I whatever. And no, super swell guy. He calls me dad all the time. It's really weird.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the transition as you come away. I mean, I was the same way. I was, right out of high school, started working on rigs and was the youngest guy and had to just learn to shut up and do what you're told. And then all of a sudden, I've told this story. I was a roughneck on a Precision 284 on the Chinchaga Road, and I was scrubbing the whatever, the doghouse or whatever it was. I can't remember, but I looked over and seen the consultant sitting in a shack with his feet up, and he was watching the hockey game. And I thought to myself, that's a good job. I'm going to do that job someday. And sure enough, a few years later, I'd worked my way up to driller, and then I went back to school and got my petroleum engineering diploma from SAIT. And so I went back out as a well site supervisor. And I don't know, 7 years later, I was that guy. But you'd be phoning into Calgary to talk to the superintendent, and he'd have to excuse himself because he was at Earl's or whatever. And he's, yeah, okay, just give me a second. And then the din would come down, and he'd start, and you'd tell him all the things breathlessly that were going on in your lease. And he'd be like, yeah, cool, sounds good. And he'd hang up. And I thought to myself, that guy's got a good job. I'm going to do that job someday. And so then a few years later, there I am as a drilling and completion superintendent, and you're the guy taking those calls. And it dawned on me about the second year into that the guy who really had the world by the tail, the guy who had it made, was the guy that was rubbing the paint off the side of the rig because he was making all the money. And at the end of at 7:30 or 7 o'clock, he went away for 12 hours and didn't give a shit what was going on. Right. And that's the guy who had her made.
Talk about that all the time, man. Everyone wants to be the consultant because all they see is the feet up, arms behind the head, watching the TV. What they don't see is the man crying himself to sleep every night. They don't see him when he's pulling his hair out, right? I had a good conversation with, and I really want to get a consultant on. I know a couple of them that I could talk to that would probably do it, but I was having a good conversation with Ryan McLean, consultant on PD 574. They're mainly out of Dawson the last couple of years. They were in Fox. That's how I got to know them. But then they moved over to Dawson, and now they're in GP. And solid guy. Started out on that rig as just bottom feeder. Worked his way up, driller, tool push. Now he's the rig manager, right? Now he's the consultant. And he says to me, he's like, man, he's like, sorry, I had to push the cement job back so many times, man. He's like, cementers got caught up on this job, so they were going to be a couple hours later. So I had to call like 50 other people to be like, hey, you guys can't come till this time. And then something else happened. So I had to call 50 other people back and be like, hey, it's been pushed back this way. And then the cementers call back and like, hey, we actually freed up earlier than we thought we would. We can be there now. So then he has to call 50 people back and be like, hey, can you come now? Right. And then, so he's responsible for everyone. And not to mention who's going to jail if something happens on that site.
Right. Or something goes a little bit sideways and there's 10 engineers in Calgary breaking down the pay song by the minute. And you're sitting there with your hair on fire trying to get all these people off location. And then they're like, we just want to talk about what were you thinking here, right there? And you're like, seriously, guys, this is the conversation. Can I just get my ticket signed? Can we get this show on the road here? And yeah, it's incredibly, it's a thankless job. On being on every side of that role, it's a thankless job. All you do is try to get to the other side with as much money as you can.
Speaking of which, just want to give a quick shout out to there's a service rig down the Big Stone here in Fox Creek. It is no longer with us today. It burned to the ground. Everyone made it off site safely. And then down towards Grand Prairie, another one, I guess, blew up, or so I heard. I don't know how true it is yet. And that was like a day or so ago, and there was a fatality apparently. So that's pretty sad shit, and that sucks. Wow. Yeah,
that's a bummer, man. Let's pour one out for the fella or the lady, the person that went to work one day and didn't come home. That's unacceptable in our industry.
It is. And you know what's crazy about that? I don't know if we can really talk about it too much, but whatever, it's a fact. For every certain amount of man hours worked, they're allowed to kill one person or two people. You know what I mean? It's a thing. It's a statistic, and they're allowed to do it without repercussion. Like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, hey, you work this many hours, cool. Here's a freebie, right? And that's unacceptable, right? Like, it's looked at as like, well, it was bound to happen. So but goal zero or journey to zero or mission zero is a thing. So I believe they're trying to take steps to make sure there is none, right? So
there's never an excuse in any industry for a situation to exist where somebody comes to work and can't go home safely with their family. And that's just it can't be a slogan on the back of coveralls or on the side of a truck. It has to be the way that everybody in that workplace feels. That's the only way to be. That's the only option.
No, what's when you worked on the rigs, what was the craziest thing you've seen or did?
I wonder what the statute of limitation. That's over 20 years. So I was working on Precision 284, which was an old jackknife triple. It was about a 3,500 meter rig. It had two pumps. It was a nice size rig. We were working down the Wolf Lake Road, just south of Edson for Talisman. And I still remember the consultant's name, but in case he's a listener, I'm gonna spare him the details. So we were drilling the one last hole before breakup. There we were gonna actually rack the rig at a plant site or compressor site down there. So it was muddy, it was mucky. Things were tough to get in and out of. We were staying in Edson, so it was a long drive to get in and out of. And we were on our 24-hour, we were on our 8-hour short change. So we came in at midnight or whatever time, and we were going to work till 7 a.m. And we were just starting to pump singles about midnight that night. I was working motors, so I was the guy. I had the empty hard hat, and I was, there was all Kellys back then. There was only ultra supersonic rigs had top drives. So I was putting the spinning chain on, racking pipe back in the Mosul to lay it down because that was the only way you could use the pump to get off bottom. So we pumped our whatever 10 or 12 joints, and everything started coming free. So I was in the doghouse taking my rain gear off and taking my rubber gloves off, getting some Green Kings, and I heard a big thump, and I heard screaming, and I looked out, and my driller was on the floor, on his knees on the rig floor, and the brake handle was down into the cellar, and he reached up and he was playing with his drum clutch. And what had happened was the brake band, the linkage in the brake band around the drum had snapped, and his brake handle fell through the floor, and he reached up and engaged his hoisting clutch. But enough wraps had come off the drum that when he did that and it snapped the other way, it broke right at the saddle. So everything was free falling. But of course, with all that debris in the hole, the bit was being held up. So the Kelly and everything was out over top of the V-door. And then when the bottom let go, it just slungshot everything over top of the drawworks and the floor motors. And everything came to a crashing halt right there on the floor. And right where I guess I don't know what they call them these days, but back then there was a dummy roughneck and a stud roughneck. So the dummy side roughneck, he was kind of on that rig. He was kind of cornered where the chain for the rotary table came off the drawworks. And right where that dummy roughneck, his name was Russ Federley. If I live to be 100, I'll never forget the guy. Where he should have been standing was essentially the Kelly, like where everything piled up. And so I came out, and the derrick hand was down in the chain shack because he'd been rolling pipe. So he was down in the chain shack getting ready to go up the stick. Shannon was our driller. He was obviously shaken, not stirred. And there was 2 roughnecks unaccounted for. And so we were yelling. There was Colin and Russ, and Colin come. He was down on the floor or on the V-door stairs. He watched it all happen in real time. And then Russ came up he just bailed onto the mud tanks, and we were just like, what the hell just happened? So I ran down to get the derrick hand. I went over and got the tool push. It was the middle of the night. Everyone was sleeping. And so we dropped the blocks over top of the floor motor, over top of the drawworks. We respooled, we slipped and cut, and we were using soft line and the snake to restring the blocks at 7 o'clock in the morning. Like we didn't even call Calgary. I don't know what they did, but nobody was making it. Like that's an OH&S violation. That's like a mechanical lifting device failed. And that morning when the other crew came on, they were 2 hours away from continuing out of the hole. Like it was just absurd, the things that we did. It was crazy.
Safety has gotten a lot better in the last, 20 years, but even more than that. But when I first started in the patch, right, like I was working on a gravel crusher, right, and in GP, and the safety guy was standing right there watching everything. And I had a 5-foot crowbar and a sledgehammer, and I hit my finger and took my finger to the bone, right? I've poured water over his blood, and I've never had water sting a cut that badly before. So I'm sitting there trying to wrap it, looking, make sure no one's watching, right? And the safety guy turned around, he's right there. He's like, "Let me see." He looks at it. He's like, "You want to go to the hospital?" I'm like, "Are you asking me or telling me?" And he's like, "Well, do you want to?" And I'm like, "Not really." He's like, "Do you want to go back to camp?" I'm like, "No. If I go back to camp for this now, people are going to call me a sissy or a wussy or whatever. I use different words, but whatever." And he's like, "Okay." And he wraps it up for me, and he's like, "Have a good day." right? Now I took this finger here. I had a piece of like a little piece of I guess a hook or whatever from the Mister Pad go in this side and out the other side. And I knew what had happened. It was chewing through our gloves all day. It was only a matter of time before someone had gotten it, right? And it just happened to be the last of Mister Pad. And I bear hugged the shit out of it, picked it up, I took it, and it chewed through. And I'm like, oh, that bit more than glove, right? So I looked down. I'm like, oh shit. I wrapped my hand back around very gently, and I Superman dove out of the vessel. And so I ripped my air mask off and whatever. And God bless the air hand for like being right there to unhook my air immediately because I was running. Right. By the time I made it to the medic, it had already clotted up. So like that was pretty cool. Right. It went through an existing scar, which I had. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it went through an existing scar, and that had gotten from roofing with my dad. That took my whole knuckle clean right off my finger, pretty much. And so he's like, "Well, you're done for the day. You're going to the hospital. You can't drive yourself. You got to call someone to take you." So it was like an hour and a half away from Fox. Had to call my boss. My boss came. They did a whole report, and I still talk to the safety guy this day. That happened like 2.5, 3 years ago. He's like, yeah, that was like a year and a bit's worth of paperwork and investigating we had to do and whatnot, right? That's crazy. And so I went to the hospital. I don't know if you've ever been to the Fox Creek Hospital. If you've ever had the pleasure of being there, you're in and out fairly quickly, right? But I'm pretty sure it was muscle hanging out of the bottom there a little bit, and I was like pulling on it a little bit, and it did not feel good. And so he like scrubbed it, put some chemical or whatever medicine on it, wrapped it in a band-aid. He's like, "You're fine. It's good." And I'm like, man, the horror stories I hear from my coworkers that come out of this hospital, like they always have to go to GP or White Court to get proper treatment. I'm like, this can't be good, right? But I took him for his word because that's what I wanted to hear, right? So
Yeah.
it wrapped out, and within 3 days, what did I do? I think I squeezed it a couple days later. I got all the pus out, and then it healed over, and that was the end of that.
Jeez, you should be a doctor on the side.
I should, man. Can you imagine Dr. Dick? Dr. Dick, medicine.
There you go. That's like that's a whole new angle on the social media, the podcast world. You could get people to call in and give them facetious solutions to their issues.
Like Sue Johansson on the Sunday Night Sex Show. Remember her?
Dr. Sue.
Dr. Sue Johansson on the Sunday Night Sex Show. Used to get away with watching it somehow. But, I love talking to the old hands. There was Clean Harbors guy. He was on site doing his thing. The whatchamacallit. Fuck, it's not coming to me right now. You know what I'm calling it. You know what it is though, right? He's the Clean Harbors guy. He does the fuck. Come on now. Someone must know. I can't remember. Anyways, so I was cleaning out his poly tank, and we got to shooting the shit one day. The guy's 70 years old. His wife's 45. I'm like, good for you, man. He just had a kid like 4 years ago. I'm like, shut up. Like, this guy's gonna die on the rig, right? Not like because of incident or anything, but like he's gonna have a heart attack in camp one day, and that's just gonna be it. And it's gonna be of natural causes, like heart attack from old age. See you later. And we were talking, and I'm like, man, how long you been in the patch for, man? I'm like, well, how long you been working the race? And as a centrifuge, by the way, no one had to tell me. So he's like, well, when I first started, we were digging our own trenches by hand.
Yeah, I did that. That wasn't that long ago.
That's fucked.
Yeah. Get the steam going around, get some heavy plastic, start digging trenches. You got to have a place to blow your boiler down by the end of the day. So you started there. And yeah.
We just suck the boiler out now before we leave.
Oh, no. we used to dig a big hole and create a big hazard of hot water melting all around you. So somebody at least once a while tripped into it or slipped into it or whatever. Yeah.
Nice. Good for you guys.
We drilled a well for Conoco at Sunset House one time, and we had an old consultant. He was old. He was 75 or 80. He was old. And he was back when consultants, he worked for Conoco as an employee well site supervisor. and he worked till he was 65. And we were sitting, and he said, "Why didn't you retire? Like that would have had, they would have had a great pension match. Like there would have been absolutely no reason to continue to work." And I forget where they lived. Him and his wife lived on a acreage outside of some city or town or whatever. And he said, I got home, and like I was home for 10 days, like I normally would have been. And then on day 11 or 12 or whatever, he said, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, what do we do? And his wife said, well, we go to town for coffee. And so they jumped in his truck, and he said he backed out of the garage, and they were driving towards the end of the laneway. And his wife went to light a cigarette because they couldn't smoke in the cafe. So she was going to have her cigarette on the way there. And he said, you don't smoke in my truck. And he got to the end of the laneway. He turned around and went back into the garage and walked into the house and phoned his old superintendent. I'm coming back to work. I don't care where you put me, but don't leave me here. And he'd been working for like 15 more years after that.
That's crazy. A lot of stories, and I've talked to a lot of guys that are like, yeah, man, I got out of the patch for a while. I was out for 2-3 years, wanted to go home, spend time with the wife and kids, or the kids were empty. The kids had gone out. Now we were empty nesters. I wanted to go and be with my wife. I got home, and the oil runs in your veins now, right? There's something about the smell of invert and sawdust, that just, it calls you, right? And when I was trying to get when I was getting my air fresheners going, I actually wanted a sawdust and invert scent, somehow get an invert scented air freshener, but it didn't work out that way. But we're not done yet. So whatever, we can figure that out along the way. Maybe I'll take a sample of invert somewhere someday, and they can make that a full-time scent. But yeah, and this guy, he's like, yeah, I went home, I spent 2 years there, and he's like, 2 years with 2 years with the wife, and it was either come back to work or get divorced. And
Yeah.
that's shit, man. That is shit, because that's your wife. That's you got to learn to live with each other again. And I get that would be hard. We do that every day's off, 7 days off. You learn to live with each other again, and then it's time to go. But it sucks when the time comes, and you got to learn to live with each other again, and you just can't figure it out. That scares the hell out of me, right? You know what I mean? I don't think my wife and I will ever have that issue. I'll push her buttons till the day I die. I don't care. She ain't going nowhere. I'll trap her in the house, handcuff her in the basement. I don't care.
Yeah, no, and I'm the opposite. I mean, it's really difficult for me to say too much bad things about the energy industry and the oil patch, because it's been good for me. It's been it's a life far beyond I deserve or could have ever hoped for. But I'll never, like, the day that I don't have to work in energy and care about the price of oil or what they're doing somewhere else around the world and how it's going to affect my commodity, that will
Yep.
be like, I'll be out, Gordo out, gone, doing something different. The money they could take, like, I could take it or leave it. It's great right now while the kids are young, but I would, the connections I've made, and somebody else keeps working in it and has lots of money to spend on a business that I decide I want to start, maybe we'll do something different, 100%. Because I used to drive by a drilling rig and get romantic about the days on it, but then I think about nippling up when it's 40 below, or that 3-day rig move when we had to take the head of steam off the boiler, and there was just, you had no heat for that first day when you're trying to make that rig go back together. It was just like, no, not that sexy. I don't remember it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna miss these days at all. Like, I'll look back fondly, but like, sticking your head in a P tank for a couple minutes when you're cleaning it out and coming out and having to sit down because you're seeing stars. The benzene's being an issue, which they're not anymore. Everyone's
Yeah.
taking their mitigate that. You got to be under air now if you even go near the entrance of a door. Um, you know, um, you know, yeah, minus 40. I'm not gonna miss that, right? Maybe I don't know. I kind of joke around all the time about how, hey, this separates the men from the boys. And you know what? It really does. But, I don't have nothing to prove when I'm 50, 60 years old, right? Hey, I'm a man. I survived my time, like, there is something about going outside to work in minus 40 that just like gets you amped up. You know what I mean? Maybe you had it when you were there, but like, I hate it, but I love it, right? Because I'm like, I'm proving to myself, and when I make a video about it, take a picture, I'm proving to the world, maybe. I don't know if that many people are watching, but like, I'm proving to whoever's watching and myself that, hey, you know what, like shit on me all you want for being an energy worker. Let's see you do this, right? Like, go,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and it doesn't matter how many people see it. The fact that you just put it out there for people to see, that's the part about any of this that matters, right?
I say that all the time. I say that all the time. You know, I don't care about views anymore. You know, the people that need to see it are seeing it, right? If you go viral, going viral is almost counterproductive because if you have millions of views on it, people that don't need to see it are seeing it and putting their input in that, you know, they don't know nothing about it, right? So it's kind of almost counterproductive. You're reaching people beyond your community, right? And hey, if they want to take interest and become a part of that community and learn about it, that's cool. If they don't, cool, move on. But a lot of people can't just move on. They got to be like, oh, you're killing the environment, yada yada yada. Your wife is cheating on you. Your kids don't know you. Blah 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 blah. Back in oil field in the house. What's up? Reading the comments section here. Two-putt Shakur. What's up? I love the Bakken and I love the Permian. Big part of my following comes from those two places. They're phenomenal. And Efren Tavar, dude, the hat, merch link in bio. I don't know where you're commenting from. Facebook. Yeah, Facebook. The link's in the bio. www.frostedcollective.com or .ca. I don't know which one it is. Woman who made my website. She's in the comment section. She knows. Uh, yeah.
Always hustling, hey Dick. You can never just like that's just part of it, hey. Like it's just a comment, like, but you got that in you, man. That's part of you.
Well, man, like, so when I first started it, right, like, I had no idea people were gonna be like, oh, the sticker with your face on it, I want that, you know, or something with your name, I want that. That's cool. And for me, like, I'm not doing the whole merch thing to get rich. That's why the prices are cheap. That's why we made it at home. That's why we keep it. We don't go third party or whatever and have to jack the prices up. You know, it's just something cool. I want to see a T-shirt that my wife and I have, you know, designed the logo for, and she put all her hard work and time into to make. I want to see that on someone. That's cool, right? Like, I bought a sweater and a hat off a guy that I followed on TikTok, and it charged $130 for the two of them. Crazy, right? And so, hey, you want a t-shirt, $20. You know, you want a sweater, I think the sweaters are 50, the hats are 30, right? I'm not making a crazy insane amount on it. You know, my wife is, she gets a couple bucks for her time, but like, like it's pretty cool, right? And as a oil and gas worker who goes through the ups and downs of the price swings, it's good to have your hand in many different pots, because you gotta what's the word I'm looking for? Um,
Diversify.
diversify your portfolio. There you go.
But how strange is it when you roll up on a new rig that you haven't worked on before and there's like some dude's got your hat or your face on his hard hat? Like that's got to be surreal the first couple times.
That's pretty cool. Seeing my sticker or seeing my a shirt, it's that's pretty cool. But like the weirdest thing ever, right? Like I talk about this a lot too, right? Um, when someone recognizes you, right, you don't know who they are because like you don't roll on the site and be like, oh my god, that guy follows me, right? Like you don't know. But when you're on the site, they already know who you are, right? And they're like, that guy, oh, it's that guy from TikTok or Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, whatever, right? And like it's surreal to be like, and it happens with consultants. I had a consultant do it too, where I was on site all day. He didn't know I was there, and then at the end of the day, I went in and to sign out, and he's like, "Dick Frost has been on my site all day." I'm like, "Hey," and then he's like, "Dude, I'm just collecting TikTok people now," and he's like, "I'm one away from meeting everyone that I wanted to meet, right?"
Yeah.
And naming off all these people that like I talk to on a regular basis, and I think that's cool, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's wild. There was a couple years ago on my Northwell Trucking project. I had Lucille or Lucy, the rig mover chick, I
Yep.
think is what her handle is. And I ran into her once that whole winter. A guy overshot a T intersection and was buried. And we had this bed truck. We just radioed out and said, "Is there a bed truck?" And we got, yeah, there'll be one there shortly and coming from the laydown yard. And this lady shows up and man, like she had that bed truck humming on a dime. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Like that was not what we were all expecting. And she was busy doing something, so she took off. And then lo and behold, because you actually told me when you came on the podcast, like put a hard hat on when you do my promo and you'll see
Yeah.
the engagement go up. So I just threw one of my old hard hats on and did the old Dick Frosts on this weekend. And all my other ones are getting 300 and 400 views, and that one got 7,500. And so I've going through, and if you stop and look at that, the algorithm picks it up, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this lady that was working for Northwell up in Firebag 3 or 4 winters ago when I saw her once, and she's got like this huge TikTok following, and all these people are watching her videos, and it's like, it's just crazy to me that what people want to see. You know what I mean? There's no accounting for taste. It's just wild.
Have a good one, Efren. So funny story about Lucille, actually, rig moving chick. So the vet company that I work for, Northwell, is also owned by them, or
Oh
we
yeah.
own each other. The owner owns us both. So I've met Lucille a couple of times. The first time was a really awkward encounter. So she was on Chase Barber's podcast, and so I was on. I think I was on after her, and I was talking about my experience with Northwell because I had swamped for them a couple times when they were shorthanded, and it wasn't a good experience. Just wasn't. It was just my experience. It wasn't a good one, right? And it's not for me. And I may have crossed the line or something when I was talking about it, saying, like, hey, I didn't like it, and she took that personally. So a few months later, gone by, and she walks into the shop, and I'm like, hey, it's Big Moving Chick. What's going on? She looks at me. She just doesn't say anything. And I'm like, hey, how come you don't have more of a following? Your videos kill it. She's like, well, some of us sit around and do nothing all day. Some of us actually work for a living, dick. Right? Like, it's like, oof, spicy, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I had few choice words when I was describing her, and they weren't nice, but whatever. It was what it is, whatever. And then I went back on to Chase's podcast like a few months after that, right? And we were talking about it again, and I'm like, so that was just my experience, But I actually met Lucille, and she didn't like what I said, and I'm like, hey, nothing against Northwell, because like all great people. It was just my personal experience, and I'm sorry if I offended anyone that works there. It was just, I didn't have a good time. Right. And then so I think another couple of months had gone by, and she came back in, and she saw me, and she's like, hey, I wanted to say sorry for our last interaction, and she's like, I'm sorry I came off that way. And I'm like, hey, it is what it is, whatever. I didn't take it anyway, but I did take it that way. But she's like, yeah, that first podcast really, really fired me up, and she's like, when I heard the second one, she's like, I just felt terrible, right? It was your experience. And I'm like, yeah, no, exactly what it was. And so we talked for a few minutes, and then she carried on her merry way, right? And yeah, Lucille's a nice gal.
Well, and you think about like how, I don't know what the right word is, but like how sensitive is not the right word, but aware of how being a woman in that line of work, specifically that line of work in the oil field,
Oh, yeah.
how aware how things can be construed. You almost have to understand how she looks at things the hard way the first time, and then she takes that step back. I don't think anyone who's got any kind of understanding of how it works out there can blame her for that, right?
No, not at all. And I think any woman in the oil field, there's a lot more of them now than there was before. But like, I think any woman in the oil field, comes in with that, I got a point to prove, and there's a chip on my shoulder, and I'm gonna show y'all that I can do it, right? And but in that industry in particular, that the rig moving industry, I don't know how many women are in that part of the industry, but there can't be a lot. You could probably count the amount of them on one hand if you got all your fingers. Sorry, rig movers. Uh, so
Well, but the other part of that is, if she has some experience, if a lady's doing that and she's been around, she's got to be good, because that's the only
oh,
way she's sticking it out. You know what I mean? So then you're like, okay, we'll take that whole group, that whole crew of women with the pole trucks and the big beds, and the one on the Commander. That's who we want in March to come in and do it, because they're bulletproof, right?
Oh, dude, and yeah, she is. Like, she don't take no shit. Like I've heard stories, about her. And then when that first interaction I had with her, it was just like, shit, yo, put the guns away, like bulletproof vest is on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She's a nice gal though, so you know, whatever. I get it. I get it right from the beginning when she said that. I'm like, oh shit. Like I also didn't realize what I was saying.
No.
I didn't think what I was saying held any merit. You know what I mean? I've just, and I've had to. It's been a long time since that podcast, and I've had to come to terms and realize that we didn't ask for it. Well, we kind of did by being on here, but we're just people making videos, right? And people are putting those kind of people on pedestals, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
holding to higher standards, which I mean is good. Hey, hold everyone to a higher standard. But like, if I step out of line and say something that I don't mean, don't burn me on the cross for it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm just a person like you. I'm gonna say shit that I shouldn't. The difference is I'm saying it on a public platform where there's gonna be who knows how many people pick up on it, and it goes through their brain, right? So
Well, yeah, but I mean, as long as you're not being intentionally hurtful, you're not doxing somebody. You know what I mean? There's some lines you can't cross, but other than that, there's also like the unfollow button or put your phone down and go for a walk. Like just because
yeah,
you're mad about something doesn't mean you have to. I keep things like really tame on my podcast purposely. Like it's super non-political. It's super just tell me your story, tell me your take on it. I don't want to get into your thoughts on God because I don't care, and nobody else listening does. But there has been some times where we've just kind of danced around things a little bit. That it's like, you know, uh, this is what it is. This is who I am. This is what I believe. You know what? You can always just not listen, and that's fine too.
yeah, yeah, 100%. There's a I'm not interested in this block, right?
Yeah.
If you don't want to again and you don't follow them, but they keep popping up, block. You'll never see them again, right? Not everyone needs to know your opinion, and same goes with creators too. Not everyone needs to know our opinion either. But hey, we're putting it out there, and if you want to listen to it, listen to it. But at the same time, I get both sides. You know, the whole purposely, not talking about certain things. I do that too, right? I love talking politics, but I save that for my personal Facebook page with my friends, and I save that for home and my coworkers, even when they don't want to hear it, right? But where I don't put it is on my
Right.
TikTok, Facebook page, and my Dick Frost Facebook page, and my podcast. I leave that out of it, right? So I've jumped into politics a couple of times on TikTok and on Instagram. And on Instagram, when I jump into politics, I bleed followers for a week,
Oh
right?
yeah.
It's like, ooh. So I stay away from that, right? If you look at where I work and some of the things that I support or whatnot, it's not hard to tell which way that domino falls, anyways, right? But I don't
Oh
need to
yeah.
talk. I don't need to talk about it, right? You can tell, and I'm not shoving my opinion down your throat about it. There's a woman on TikTok. She's out of Ontario. Where we've talked about having her on the podcast. I think she's got like 15, 20 million followers. Everyone knows which way she swings on the political pendulum. Pendulum. Yeah, everyone knows which way she swings, right? She's a teacher. She's part of the LGBTQ community. She's a fucking nice person, right? And we've talked. I'm like, man, you're my favorite liberal in the world. We don't see eye to eye on politics, but I love your stance on things. I love your point of views, and I think you have great topics of conversation, great talking points. So like we talk in the DMs. We don't talk about it in the video. We don't have each other's phone number. Not yet. That's coming, right? Kylie knows who she is.
Well, but that's the thing. You stumble over the piece that's missing is a well thought out point of view, right? You can respect a well thought out point of view even if it's different. The problem is those are so few and far between. It's just that's the part that I get. I'm the same as you. I believe what I believe, and if anybody knows anything about me and listens to the pod, they know where I'm at. But it's like I just don't feel like having to explain another to another person who has no interest in understanding where I'm coming from. So it's like, let's just stop this right now, and we'll just talk about people who are doing their second act.
I love that, man. I love your whole podcast, right from your son being part of it with you, right down to the kinds of people you're able to get on your podcast, interview you put together. Right, we talked a little bit in backstage, if you want to call it that, how like I don't put pen to paper and come up with a plan, because I found that plans, just working in the oil field, has done that to me. Plans go awry all the time. You put a plan together, it's not going to go that way. You know what I mean? It's just not. And if it does, wow, there's some miracle and the other shoe is about to drop. So hold on tight. So there's no plan. I fly by the seat of my pants, and it goes how it goes, and that's how I love it. That's chaos. I thrive in the chaos.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that like as we were saying, that's where the magic happens, is when somebody kind of takes you tangentially over here and you're like, okay, I got to follow up on that. That was just too great of a comment for me to not get some follow up on. But
Yep.
I just, for mine, because I try to keep it, I call it one Calgary commute, 40 minutes. You can get anywhere in Calgary in 40 minutes. So I try to
Yeah.
keep it to that. And I just have things I want to, touch on. And I've had lots of interviews where like the bottom third of the page we hadn't even touched on, but we were already an hour deep, right? And it's like, we'll have you on for part two, I guess, because this is just too good to not continue to talk about this. And the ones that I find are like that are the ones where I'm talking to people who are doing something in the mental health space now, because often they get into the meat and potatoes of their story about why mental health became so important to them. It feels like you'd be doing a huge disservice to them to stop that, or to supplement that with a story about something that you want to talk about. And kind of the next thing you know, you're 50 minutes in and this person's just kind of bared their soul to you. I had one with a lady named Kara Fogwell from Powell River, BC. And I joked, she might be my favorite episode ever. She was like 61 or 62. Uh, I apologize, Dick, but like she literally like took a deep breath and talked for like 42 minutes. Like it just was pouring out of her. And she talked about being abused and being an abusive marriage and this child and how she was struggling. And I had all these things about the VR wellness initiative that she was putting together, the VK wellness initiative. And it just seemed so trivial compared to what she was talking about. You know what I mean? And at the end, I was like, I've never done one of these before. I'm going to have to like interject my thoughts into it where it makes sense, where she was taking a breath, collecting herself. And it was just such a crazy experience. I shouldn't use, I really have to get away from using the word crazy, because that is an implication all onto its own. But it
Yeah.
was such a unique experience for this. Like I literally started this as a self-help thing for me to figure out why I was the way I am. And now I'm having these people come and pour their story out to me. It was just incredible to go, wow, look at what I can't cut any of this. And I didn't get to the things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Yep. I have a lot of aha moments doing this and on TikTok in general, where it's like, damn, this is why I do this. This is why I do that. Right. There's a video for everything out there. Right. And it's, yeah, no, man, we could go on for hours about why I am the way I am, why I talk the way I talk, why sometimes I joke the way I do. Everything right down from the moment I say hi to how long it takes me to say goodbye, right? There is a reason for it. And
Yeah.
dude, it's some deep shit sometimes, right? And it's pretty crazy. There you go. I gotta stop using the word crazy too. I say it a lot. It's unreal.
Well, it's funny how some words you're able to just block out of the lexicon. I mean, I'm a few years older than you, but they're like, we said the R word fairly regularly. Like, growing up, that was a word. You don't hear it a lot much anymore. The N word was still pretty verboten by the time I was, in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. I don't recall saying it a lot or at all. But now we're just, as linguistics evolve and people, their views change, words just kind of go away. And my wife always gives me a hard time because I say everything is interesting on the podcast, but I'm like, out of all the other options, that's the most benign. So can you just leave me that word, please? It's interesting. And just leave that
Yeah.
with me.
It's crazy how awesome that word is.
There you go.
Do you have any podcasts that you like to listen to? Any ones that you would?
So I do. I try to listen to the Big Story every morning on my way to work. It's a fairly left leaning podcast out of Toronto, star global news kind of thing. I like to listen to it because I like to try to understand why those people out there think the way they do. That's why. And then, other than that, I really try to like dump my podcast list about every 3 months and just go find 5 or 6 new ones to, I I'm love hate with Rogan. He does such a great job when he wants to challenge people, but when he's just telling people how great they are, it gets to 3 hours of that gets to be a bit much. Got into Huberman Labs fairly heavily recently. His podcast in the early part of December regarding optimizing caffeine use, blew my mind, actually. A lot of the things that he was talking about. And then actually, shout out to my good friend Dick Frost, the 90s podcast, Kathy Kinzora.
Oh.
He turned that on to me. And then I listened to your old pod. And it was fine. I guess I kind of, I did it because I knew you, and I was like, okay, I want to see what these guys, and some of their stuff I found interesting. Some of the stuff I've listened to everything but Dennis's podcast, and I actually find this format is better. I find that I guess maybe because I had a bit of a history with you that I was more interested in what you had to say maybe than the other guy. And this is you. They're like, this is unabashedly Dick Frost, right? And that's the kind of stuff. That's who I'm turning into, and that's a good friend of mine. He works with comedians in the Lower Mainland in Victoria, and he's super supportive of my pod. But he's like, you need people tuning in to hear what you think of the guest and not just the guest. And that's where I'm, I've kind of gone to a certain level, and I just haven't turned that corner with it yet, right? People don't tune in to talk to Gord. They tune in to hear who Gord's talking to. And that's what we're trying to get that sorted out here right now.
What Kylie said down there, anything with Dennis on, anytime I have Dennis on, it's always mental health, right? Like the episode 2 was big about mental health.
Oh yeah.
Every time Dennis is on, Dennis brings a comedic side to it, right? But we'll always take it to mental health. Dennis is going through it. Dennis is always going through it. We're all always going through it, right? And that's okay. And we've come to talk about how he's seeking help, and I'd rather him seek help and talk about that and unleash it all on me if he needs to, rather than me getting a phone call from someone saying, hey, Dennis isn't with us anymore, because Dennis is a fucking super swell dude, and the kind of guy you go to bat for all the time. So because he's right there going to bat for you. So when he's talking mental health, we listen. And we were talking on that episode about how like mental health never truly gets better. You just learn to maintain it, right? And that's a thing that a lot of people got to learn, right? Is like, oh, you're not gonna get better. You're gonna learn to be happier, and you're gonna learn to maintain and be okay. You're gonna survive between bouts, right? It's pretty much what it is, and that's huge, right? A lot of people need to learn that this is never going away. This is going to be here forever, right? And it only helps if we talk about it, because the only way we get through it is together, right? So.
Well, and that reminds me, one more podcast I do want to mention that I do listen to is the Easy Conversations podcast with Furka and Dandia. And Furk is a friend, and he founded, him and another friend of mine, Kirk Coburn, founded the Mankind Initiative. It's not the Mankind, it's not Mankind that is global. This Mankind Initiative is local to Calgary. We meet every other Wednesday. There's a group of about 20 of us, and we usually have 6 or 8 in the room, and we meet for an hour and a half every other Wednesday evening, and that's been like, there's been some super successful dudes. There's been some super in shape dudes. There's been some super good looking dudes walk through that door, and everyone is like, we start off, talking about how we are 1 to 10, and there's guys that you're just like, if you saw them on the street, you'd think they had it all, and they're like, man, I'm a 1.5 and a 2, and it's a good thing I had this to come to today. And that's one of the things that I pride myself on. My son is going to see his dad talk about how he feels, so that the stigma goes away, so that he can understand that you can be a man, whatever that entails in your brain, and you can still put your hand up when you need help and say, I'm struggling today. So
That's something that the previous generations, the boomers, had a hard time doing, and they passed that on to their millennial children, right? Where, my dad was not good at that at all. My dad was hurting inside. Looking back now, my dad was hurting, and he still is, right? But he never talked about it, and he refused to deal with it. And how did he take that out? He took that out on everyone around him, right? And when my dad was in a bad mood, everyone, if you were in a good mood, you suffered, right?
yeah, yeah,
And always in a good mood, right? So like I wasn't. I've talked about this before. I wasn't necessarily a target. It was any woman in the house. We've talked about that before, on actually the last podcast. Not the last one, episode 4. So episode 4, we talked about that with Tara from Octane Energy Services. There, she safety services, I should say, and she talked about the window of tolerance. So if you here, she showed me this, right? So she showed me the window of tolerance, right? We're here in the middle here, everything's all good. Up here, you're manic, you're riding a high, and down here, you're just like, I'm not getting off the couch, right? So in here is where everyone kind of sort of always wants to be, but you're here or you're here, you're rarely here, right? So it's really interesting, and I love talking about that with her. And you said that was the Easy Conversations podcast.
yeah. EZZ, I
uh
guess Canadians. EZ Conversations for Candandia. He's got some pretty incredible people. I don't know how he gets in touch with people and finds people, but man, he's got like people from Australia and all over the world dialing in to chat, and he's got a few guys on there that you know the things they talk about, the conversations they have. I mean, Frick's trained in the mental health space, so he's able to guide those conversations. But it's pretty incredible.
that's awesome, man. I love that. Here's a podcast you should add to your list. It's called the Basement Buddies podcast. It's with Basement Brooks. I met him here on TikTok. He lives in Oregon. Solid dude,
Oh yeah,
a real solid individual. He's a UPS driver, and just the things that he does. I think he does a couple of them from his hot tub. Actually, it's interesting. He just chilling in his hot tub. What's up, guys? This is Basement Brooks, right? And yeah, no, he's a really good guy. There's that one. There's Spit and Chicklets. If you're a sports fan. There's the Steve Dangle podcast. Another that's mostly if you're a Leaf fan.
yeah.
Um, yeah, he's a solid guy. I listen to History of the '90s on the regular. Like that is, I don't know if you listen to the latest one or not. The
Oh
Women
yeah,
of Country,
yeah.
Women of '90s. I did not realize how much they suppressed women these days in country music. Like how listening to that podcast, they're like, yeah, women in the '90s, they broke out, right? They had it crazy, and now you barely hear any women on the radio, country singer wise, because they have to have a what was it, a 10-to-1,
Yeah.
10-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
They can never play more than one woman at a time. If you play back to back, that's not, it doesn't fit, right? You got to do like 10 men singers and then put in a woman and then 10 more men.
the women should be the men should be the lettuce and the women should be the tomatoes is what they said in that podcast, and it blew my mind
Yeah,
that that dude went on a industry podcast and actually said that out loud.
yeah, yeah. And who was it? Was it Martina McBride that wore the tomato shirt?
Yeah,
She's like, "Hey,
yeah,
right? Call me tomato." I love the Dixie Chick story, right? I've always found that one kind of interesting and why it played out, and how it's going. And I didn't realize, and Leanne, was it Leanne Rhymes?
yeah.
How young she was, not, and just different parts of, how her dad. I never knew that story, right?
I have a great story on one of my pods about the Dixie Chicks. Actually, I don't know if it made it in the story, but or in the pod, but um, one of the guys one of the guys I camp with all summer back at Candle Lake, Saskatchewan, is he's a fellow named Donnie Peranto. He's a country music singer, songwriter. He's a fiddle player, and his claim to fame was he was the fiddle player in Neil McCoy's band in the '90s and early 2000s, like the Wink and all those songs. He was the only member of that band that toured with him and recorded with him. And he, in that they talk about how Natalie Maines was kind of mashed together with the sisters, right? And Donnie talks about how he, being a fiddle player, he'd help them get some people together. And I don't know exactly which one, but how as soon as they got as big as they got, all of a sudden they lost Donnie's number. He couldn't get any love back from him when they got big and he needed tickets anywhere. So
Oh, that's it. Um, so I have a question for you. Actually, I have a couple questions for you. Actually, and answer it if you want. Answer if you don't, or don't answer if you don't. Um, your podcast, it's going really, really, really well. Have you considered, or do you already currently have like sponsors? Have you looked into it? Do you have some?
So no, that was kind of so I'm going to be 100 episodes deep in May. I'll probably take some time off in the summer and run some best of stuff. I want to have things coming out, even if I'm not actively. I don't really
Yeah,
have seasons. I just kind of do them. Um, my wife and I are like we don't. It's never made a penny. All it ever has done is cost for the couple of programs you have to pay for editing and whatnot. But um, I haven't done any of that, and I did the engagement. January, I posted every day on TikTok and Instagram and got some engagement up. But I got a daughter that plays club volleyball, a son that plays hockey. My wife works full time. I work full time. I'm just kind of tapped, and I just, it's like if I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day in January, and I was literally on social media until 5:30. Like it was a half an hour before I even did anything in the morning, getting those posts up. And if that's the grind that it's going to be, if that's what a sponsor needs from me in order to pay for a new mic or a new computer or something like that, it's like I'm a 45-year-old dude, man. I just don't know if I have it in me.
yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. Are you on RSS? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you have to
I
RSS?
I use Anchor, so that's creates an RSS feed. Yeah,
Yeah, so StreamYard too, and so there's that. If you go into the tools thing, it tells you podcasts of any size is eligible for it, right? And it shows you a list of the people who are looking to sponsor a show, and like sometimes they're not very big and whatnot, the companies or whatnot. But I've started looking into that. This will be episode 6, right? I'm starting to maybe after episode 10, maybe we'll see how the next couple episodes play out. I don't care if they don't do well or not. I'm having a lot of fun. This is a passion for me. The last podcast ignited that, right? Where, I always like to talk. I always like to get to know people. So like the last podcast, when that ended, it kind of bummed me out a bit. So I stopped listening to podcasts for a while, but it didn't really kill the passion, right? It just I need to take some time away from that. So but after, I don't know, maybe after episode 10, I'm gonna start really, really looking around at who I can send a message to, or message, or email, text. I don't know how you do it, but like I'm gonna start looking into that because of you know and I use my AirPods. I don't have headsets like some people do, and I don't have a microphone, and I have like a soundboard. Hey, soundboard would be cool, you know. If so, what do you use to edit?
So I record with Google Meets, and then I have a Zamzar file converter that I pay for, and it takes it from an MP4 to a wave, and then I upload it into Audacity, and I do all my editing in Audacity, and then from there you can export it out as an MP3, and then you post it in Anchor, which is a Spotify product. Is how I post everything, and that's where I host all is on Anchor.
Well, that's pretty cool. So on StreamYard here, I do all this, I set it up, and then after I hit end and whatnot, it's over. I can download the video and the audio separately, and then I throw the video into CapCut, and then I do what I need to do in CapCut, and my wife the audio because I do not know how to do that, but I'm pretty sure I can figure it out. I don't like when she's a part. So it's
Yeah,
like, hey, can you help me do this? Even though it's like, hey, you know what? I need you today, right? And,
yeah,
and it's not that she doesn't want to. She loves doing it. She loves helping out. So, I love that she is taking an interest in anything that I do here. Online. When it first started, she never took interest at all, right? She was never in my live. She didn't like any videos. Now she sent video ideas. She's like, you need to do this and you need to say it like this and it needs to be brought out like that and deliver it like this and say this, but have this person that you work with a part of it. And oh yeah, she's all for it. She comes into my lives. She can go live now. So it's kind of cool. I helped her. I didn't help started making her own videos that did fairly well. Right, she got her live access, went live, and she's cool with that. She doesn't need 10,000 followers. She doesn't need 50,000 followers. She's happy with the 1,500 that she has. Right, if she gets more, she gets more.
yeah. And that's like my wife's not that at all. She prefers her anonymity. Um, I did a couple of supporting act podcasts where I talked to my son and my mom and Deanne. To this point, I don't think she gives me a hard time that she hasn't been involved. But if we actually sat down with a microphone, I'm not sure where it would go. I had a lady named Sandra Baker. Her alter ego here in Calgary is the Beer Maven. She's this saucy redheaded lady who knows, she's like a sommelier for beer is and she goes, if you're having an event at your house, you're having something, a birthday party, you'd invite her and she would get everyone's tastes and she would bring all these unique beers. And anyways, go listen to that podcast. It was a great one. But um I had this idea of the Steve Carell, Michael Scott, when he pulls up in his PT Cruiser and he's got the not Britney Spears song playing and he says it's Britney bitch and she's back or whatever. So I did that. I made a spoof of that when I pulled up and I was like, it's the Beer Maven bitch. And I have those kind of like, I did the thing with Michael Scott with the coffee cup. It's like his world's greatest podcaster on it. And I said, yeah, like I bought it at a garage sale at Joe Rogan's house or something like that. I do that kind of shit, but ultimately I'm not, I don't edit well. I don't have the confidence to put those things out on the regular. You know what I mean? Like and it's a muscle. You build it. My daughter will not participate in the podcast at all. She doesn't listen to it. She's never listened to one. It's just kind of me and Liam doing our thing. He's a little bit more like me. He doesn't mind putting it out there and getting the reaction, even if it's not always as good as you'd hoped it would be. You learn from it, right? So
Your daughter will listen one day if she's not already secretly listening, right? Like she's probably got it somewhere being like, "That's my dad. He's
well,
good."
she's just about 13, and I found out she secretly had a boyfriend for 2 months. So maybe she's doing all kinds of things secretly. Who knows?
Oh, daddy's angry. My
Not at, not at all, man. It's that's where we're at in this point in life, right?
dude, 100%. That next chapter, right? And that's crazy. My 5-year-old, man, she is into some wild shit. Like not bad stuff. but she's starting to want to hit people a little bit, right? She's not knowing what to do with what her anger, and she's got some, and I think it has to do with the boy that she hangs out with, right? He's frustrating her. He's frustrating the hell out of me too. I believe me, this kid is annoying. I call him Belly Button Boy. And there's a reason for that. He pulled up into my yard this past summer or last summer maybe. He whipped it out in front of my kids and started going to the bathroom in my yard. My daughter comes running in, is like, Mom, why is he leaking from his belly button? Right? And not knowing that he just or she just caused this boy years of therapy down the road. All right. And calling it a belly button. So, so yeah, no, he's been a steady constant in our lives for over a year now, and they fight like cats and dogs, but she's starting to stand her ground back. Like he's kind of sort of bullying, but like they're five, right?
Yeah.
So there, she's kind of sort of being bullied by him, but she's starting to stand her ground. Like she's like, yeah, I hit him the other day. Like what, why? Because he hit me first. And I'm like, oh, okay. Hey, you're not gonna get in trouble if it's self-defense, right? Like, hey, good for you. Maybe we don't hit though, right? Let's find other ways around that. And my youngest daughter, she's about to turn 3 here, and she's going to jail one day.
Yeah.
Like there jail is in her future. She comes at me and a lot of other people with intent to hurt. Like there's premeditation there. What's up, Cody?
Oh man, premeditation in a 3-year-old is that's an aggressive stance to take.
She is nuts. Let me tell you this, bud. Like I don't know what we need to do to maybe there's a lobotomy in that kid's future. I don't know, right? Like that's the right word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, I'm not sure that it is, but I think it's the word you were thinking of.
Probably. He's nuts. Um, so I guess I got, one more question for you. And then, if you take it however you want to take it. I just started doing this on a different on the last podcast that's about to come out that no one's heard yet. But it's like kind of like a segment I want to add in. So let's say, okay, so you're Mount Rushmore, right? The four people that you look up to or value the most in your life or who have inspired you. Like who's on your Mount Rushmore?
Oh, 4 people.
Well, Mount Rushmore had four, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so four people
So
that
I did this for there's another group, another men's group in town here. They talked about their name, the men's league, and they asked this question. They put it out and they called or emailed and asked if I would put a submission in. So I said my dad, and I don't think that's uncommon. My dad is a little bit of a unique story. In 1985, so he would have been in his early 30s. He was suffered a massive brain injury. He was shot in the head with a 22, defending our farm from some near do wells who were trying to steal my mom's car. Massive brain injury. So he lived a unique life. Looking back as I've gotten older, I understand why he was the way he was. There was his boys were 7 and 6, and they that part of being a father was more or less taken from him. And he you talk about how your dad maybe wasn't always the most fun to be around. I lived it. He'll admit it now. It was a tough go. He's a completely different person now, and he's lost a lot of things in his life through no fault of his own with the cards he was dealt. And I'll tell you, he's 72 years old. You'd never. He doesn't speak fluently in sentences, but he can communicate. He's got some residual some stuff happening, but he's happy. He's loves his grandkids. He's just a happy grandfatherly type guy, and I look up to see the things that he's battled through, and that's just one of a number of things. But that's kind of the story shaping part for him, and he's definitely like whatever the highest president on Mount Rushmore is. That would be that guy for me. And then I have a couple of friends that I've made later on in life, that at a point in my life when I really wasn't looking for a friend. I met two guys. One guy's named Jason Jackson. He's on the podcast, and another guy's named Dave Strang. And those guys, they hold me to account. They're Jay's I think a year older than me. Dave's a year younger than me, and we have a group text that hope should be erased upon expiration, because I never want anyone to see what goes into that group text should I pass on. But I mean, they're incredible dudes. They hold me to account. They offer an opportunity for me to talk when I just need to talk. And I grew up in Saskatchewan. Dave grew up in Cold Lake, Alberta. Jay grew up in Brooks, so nothing couldn't have been different growing up. Um, and that's it's pretty wild how guys like that can have such an effect on your life when you meet them, in your late 30s. And then probably the last guy I would have to say is the guy I would consider my best friend, such as a 45-year-old man ever has one. His name's Ryan Noasad. Him and I grew up together, and right shortly, we were probably like 22, 23. He got with a lady who just had a baby, and we were in no shape to be around a baby. Like the people we were at that point in our lives, it was not conducive to raising children. But he was in love with this child's mom, and they're together still to this day, and they had two more daughters. And so that boy he raised more or less as his own. I don't know what Ethan's relationship is with his biological father, but Ryan's his dad. And Ryan took that on, and he came from a family where the same kind of thing happened. His mom and dad split, and this guy that came in to be his dad is his dad, whether or not the birth certificate says it or not. And Ryan was a huge influence on my parenting, because he had Ethan, who was however many years, 10 years older than his daughters that he had with his wife. And he would tell me all the time that, man, like, don't wish a minute of your kid's life away, because I was so young that I didn't enjoy that with Ethan, and I'm getting a second chance with Macy and Callie. Don't ever miss that, because you're not going to have that chance. Your kids you're only going to do that once. And that's something that I've kind of really taken to heart on the days when it's just feels like it's a lot or almost too much. It's like, no, I remember Nosy told me about this. It was going to feel like this some days. And that doesn't mean that you have to wish this part of their life away. You can just be beat. You can be defeated. But you got to show up next day for those kids, and you got to show up for your family. So I guess if I had to pick four people, it's my dad, it's my two buddies that I met later in life that hold me to account as a man today, and then a guy who really shaped my worldview right from I remember kindergarten, seeing this kid. His mom always laughs because she thought I was a jerk because Ryan just said mean Gord, not understanding that it was me and Gord, right? So.
Oh no, man, that's incredible. Your dad sounds like someone that you know second act. You know what I mean? Like he lived his second act fairly early, and it wasn't a good one, right? And he still managed to, I don't know, put a smile on if he did or not, but like he still managed to soldier on and still try to be something anyway.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. That guy's life is a whole podcast in itself. I mean, yeah, it's my we're getting on in time, so I don't want to get too far into it. But like, I had a younger brother. He was 16 months younger than me, and he was killed in a car accident. The funeral was the day before my 25th birthday, and so my dad, in 85, he gets shot. In 97, him and my mom split up, and my mom will tell you, like, he was a completely different person. It was just it was too much. And then in 2003, Eric passed away. That's three pretty life altering things. And I'll tell you what, man, if you saw this guy, that son of a bitch, he's gonna slap you on the back, and he's gonna ask you how you're doing. And You know, and he's figured out a way to squeeze lemons and make some lemonade. And I mean, man, how do you not look up to a guy like that, right?
Incredible. Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's a perfect way to end this, actually, because like that's one hell of a story, right? And that's kind of shaped you and how you got here.
That's who I am, bro. That's who I am. I really appreciate you having me on, Dick. I had a lot of fun. This these folks chatting over here on the side, man. It's pretty wild to see there's people out there tuning in.
Yeah, man, I love that. And it's only 5 people, but like I said, it's the right 5 people. And at one point, there was 10 or 11 in here, right? So that's I love that. And I definitely I gotta have you back on. Maybe as a guest co-host sometime. And we can take your interview style and my interview style, shoot from the hip and hope the bullet goes somewhere. Oh, what a horrible thing to say after that. Jeez, I should have thought about that.
You know what, man? It's all good. I know your heart's in the right spot, and I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to do a live one here with you. I'm gonna post it here after my March women's extravaganza. I've got episodes up till then, and I'm gonna post it, and hopefully my audience can get turned on to some of the stuff we're talking about here too.
Absolutely, man. That'd be awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for coming on, buddy. I loved having you. And yeah, this has been Gord with Second Act Podcast. He's solid individual, and you just heard his basically with the why he is the way he is. All right, guys. Everyone
For
have a good
better or
night,
for
and
worse.
yeah, stay frosty.